The UK Supreme Court has just dropped a bombshell that's shaking the whole nation. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been caught in a shocking financial scandal that could end his career. This isn't just another story, it's a historic crisis that questions everything about trust, power, and justice in British politics. What will happen next? Will Starmer survive the storm, or is this the beginning of the end? Stay tuned because the truth is finally coming out. For months, whispers and rumours about Starmer's finances circulated behind closed doors, but no one expected the Supreme Court to step in so forcefully. The court's ruling revealed a pattern of undisclosed luxury gifts and misleading financial dealings that went far beyond innocent mistakes. From designer suits gifted by wealthy donors to lavish watches and private jet trips, the revelations paint a picture of a leader caught between two worlds, the polished public face and the hidden, scandal-ridden private life. This first section will dive deep into the explosive Supreme Court judgment, detailing the shocking findings and the unprecedented constitutional implications that have sent shockwaves through British politics. The ruling didn't just stop at naming the misconduct. Chief Justice Dame Sue Carr laid bare the erosion of public trust caused by Starmer's actions. The court revealed that these were not accidental oversights, but deliberate omissions designed to hide the truth. Newly leaked documents showed Starmer's close ties to powerful donors, including Lord Wahid Ali, whose gifts were not only extravagant but suspiciously timed around key political decisions. One such moment involved Starmer's acceptance of gifts just days before unveiling tax reforms favouring media investors, a sequence the court flagged as far from coincidental. The scandal unveiled a tangled web of privilege, secrecy, and political influence, turning public outrage into calls for accountability. Political reactions poured in immediately. Senior members of all parties expressed disbelief. But the most dramatic fallout came from within Starmer's own Labour Party. Local councillors and MPs alike distanced themselves from the Prime Minister, some openly demanding his resignation. The party's strongholds in the north of England erupted with accusations of betrayal and loss of faith. Calls for a vote of no confidence gained traction rapidly, signalling a fracture that could tear Labour apart. Yet, despite mounting pressure, Starmer remained defiant, publicly dismissing the Supreme Court's ruling as a politically motivated attack. His refusal to step down only intensified the crisis, sparking a fierce backlash from legal experts and constitutional scholars who warned of a dangerous precedent if judicial authority was openly challenged. This first section lays the foundation for understanding just how far-reaching the consequences of this ruling are. Starmer's financial scandal isn't merely about hidden gifts or accounting errors, it's a fundamental challenge to the integrity of leadership in the UK. As we explore further in the upcoming sections, the scandal's impact will extend beyond legal battles, threatening to reshape political alliances, undermine public confidence, and spark a constitutional showdown unlike anything seen in recent history. Stay with me as we unravel the full story behind the Supreme Court's explosive ruling and what it means for the future of British democracy. The fallout from the Supreme Court's explosive ruling against Keir Starmer sent shockwaves throughout the political landscape, plunging the nation into uncharted territory. The revelations of undisclosed luxury gifts and financial cover-ups didn't just stain Starmer's reputation, they ignited a constitutional crisis that few could have imagined. As the details continued to surface, it became painfully clear that this scandal wasn't a mere hiccup. It was a full-scale meltdown of trust between the government and the British people. For over a year, investigators had quietly pieced together a trail of suspicious land deals, lavish perks, and questionable financial disclosures. But the court's public condemnation transformed these quiet inquiries into a national emergency. Starmer, once lauded as a figure of integrity and reform, was now portrayed as someone who had manipulated the system for personal gain, eroding the ethical foundation that underpins the office of the Prime Minister. Central to the court's judgment was the shocking extent of Starmer's financial dealings with powerful donors like Lord Wahid Ali, whose gifts, ranging from tailored Italian suits to engraved Rolex watches, were valued at over £300,000 and strategically timed to coincide with key political decisions. These weren't innocent presents, they were calculated exchanges that blurred the lines between influence and corruption. Leaked emails revealed a striking familiarity and gratitude, with Starmer personally acknowledging the generosity in ways that raised eyebrows. But it wasn't just the gifts themselves that alarmed the judiciary. It was the deliberate misclassification of these luxury items as business expenses and the failure to declare them in official tax filings. The court was unequivocal. Such omissions are not minor infractions, but serious breaches of trust and transparency. Dame Sue Carr's statement made this clear. When the highest office in the land engages in conduct that undermines public confidence, the judiciary must act to uphold the rule of law. As news of the ruling spread, the political arena became a battleground. The initial shock gave way to a wave of resignations within Starmer's inner circle, beginning with a senior Treasury advisor who stepped down just 24 hours after the court's verdict. The message was unmistakable. Loyalty to a leader accused of misconduct was rapidly eroding within the Labour Party. Long-simmering tensions erupted into open revolt. Local councillors, especially in northern England, where Starmer once enjoyed strong support, publicly voiced feelings of betrayal and disillusionment. The atmosphere was charged with anger, frustration, and a growing sense of urgency. Calls for a no-confidence vote gained momentum, with even some of Starmer's closest allies signalling they could no longer stand behind him. The scandal had shattered the illusion of unity and cast doubt on whether the Labour Party could survive the crisis intact. Yet amid the chaos, Starmer's response was defiant. In a tense and highly publicised Downing Street press conference, he dismissed the Supreme Court's findings as political theatre, accusing the judiciary of bias and interference in democratic processes. This incendiary rhetoric only deepened the crisis, sparking fierce condemnation from legal experts and constitutional scholars alike. Former Supreme Court Justice Lord Neuberger called Starmer's attacks deeply reckless, warning that undermining judicial independence threatens the very foundations of democracy. The Law Society publicly supported Dame Sue Carr's ruling and condemned the Prime Minister's defiance. Meanwhile, the media swelled with speculation of possible criminal charges, as legal analysts weighed the evidence and questioned whether Starmer could survive the mounting legal and political pressure. The scandal was no longer confined to headlines. It was unravelling the very fabric of governance in the UK. Beyond the corridors of power, public outrage grew exponentially. Protests erupted in cities across the country, with demonstrators holding signs that bluntly demanded Starmer's resignation. For many Britons already struggling with economic hardship, the scandal was a stark reminder of political double standards and broken promises. The contrast between Starmer's public image as a champion of transparency and the private reality exposed by the court was glaring and infuriating. Downing Street insiders spoke of a meltdown as the Prime Minister's team fractured under pressure, scrambling to manage the fallout with little success. The uncertainty extended to civil service ranks, where officials faced a crisis of loyalty, torn between directives from Number 10 and the legal authority of the Supreme Court. The political storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it was growing stronger by the day. In Parliament, the atmosphere was grim and heavy. When Starmer entered the Commons following the court's ruling, he was met with silence, a stark contrast to the usual jeers or cheers. His front benchers avoided eye contact, the weight of the scandal pressing down like a suffocating cloud. Letters calling for a leadership challenge flooded the 1922 committee, signalling a readiness to trigger a vote of no confidence. Reminiscent of the downfall of Boris Johnson, but this was different. This challenge wasn't about polling numbers or political missteps, it was a fundamental question of legitimacy. Could a Prime Minister openly condemned by the Supreme Court still govern effectively? The answer echoed through Westminster's halls. The trust was broken, and the path ahead was perilous. As the political drama escalated, the nation watched anxiously, aware that the stakes were nothing less than the future of British democracy itself. The constitutional crisis gripping the UK has now reached a boiling point, with the implications of the Supreme Court's scathing verdict on Keir Starmer continuing to reverberate across every corner of British politics. This third section explores the deepening political turmoil, the cascading effects within the Labour Party, and the growing calls for accountability that have placed Starmer's leadership under an unprecedented microscope. What was once a story of financial misconduct has evolved into a full-scale battle for the soul of the party, the legitimacy of government, and the very future of British democracy. After the Supreme Court's explosive ruling, the backlash against Starmer was swift and unforgiving. As the weight of public outrage bore down, senior Labour figures faced an impossible choice. Continue supporting a leader now publicly condemned by the highest court, or risk fracturing the party by demanding his resignation. The division was painfully clear. The Northern Labour heartlands, once Starmer's strongest bastions of support, erupted in anger. Councillors and activists who had campaigned for him began to speak out, describing feelings of betrayal, disillusionment, and shame. Their voices, once muted or cautiously optimistic, now carried the raw weight of frustration. The scandal shattered the carefully constructed image of a reform-minded, transparent leader and replaced it with one of duplicity and hidden agendas. Amid this growing dissent, whispers of a leadership coup turned into open discussions. Inside Labour's corridors of power, senior MPs were reportedly drawing up contingency plans for a snap leadership contest, with some factions actively preparing to trigger a vote of no confidence. The stakes could not be higher. This was no longer about internal party politics or electoral strategy. It was a battle over legitimacy and governance. Starmer's grip on power was slipping, and every day that passed without a decisive response further endangered his position. The no-confidence vote, once unthinkable for a sitting Prime Minister under such a cloud of judicial condemnation, was suddenly a looming reality. Despite mounting internal pressure, Starmer remained resolute in his defiance. In a tense Downing Street press conference, he attacked the Supreme Court's judgment as politically motivated and accused the judiciary of overstepping its bounds. His words, political theatre dressed as legal discourse, sent shockwaves through the nation and drew harsh criticism from legal experts. Former Supreme Court Justice Lord Neuberger called Starmer's remarks deeply reckless, warning that such attacks on judicial independence undermine the very pillars of democracy. The Law Society echoed these concerns, condemning the Prime Minister's refusal to respect the court's authority. Starmer's approach fractured public opinion further, alienating allies and emboldening critics who argued that no leader should be above the law. Meanwhile, the scandal's ripple effects extended far beyond Starmer's immediate circle. Government aides and senior advisers began to resign in droves, unwilling to be associated with a leadership embroiled in such controversy. One prominent Treasury advisor stepped down within 24 hours of the ruling, setting off a cascade of departures that left Downing Street's operations in turmoil. Insiders described the meltdown as Starmer's team struggled to contain the damage. Behind closed doors, civil servants wrestled with a crisis of conscience, caught between loyalty to their Prime Minister and respect for the Supreme Court's judgment. The stability of government itself was in question as policy initiatives stalled and communication broke down. The media frenzy intensified. News channels broadcast continuous coverage, dissecting every element of the scandal and its fallout. Experts debated the likelihood of criminal charges, with some suggesting that the evidence presented could lead to formal prosecution. Headlines screamed of betrayal, corruption, and the loss of moral authority. Public protests erupted nationwide, with demonstrators holding signs demanding Starmer's resignation and calling for transparency and justice. For many citizens struggling with economic uncertainty and political fatigue, the scandal was a painful confirmation of widespread distrust in politicians and institutions. Parliament itself transformed into a theatre of tension and uncertainty. When Starmer appeared before the House of Commons after the ruling, he was met not with the usual partisan shouting, but with a heavy, suffocating silence. His front benches avoided eye contact. Opposition MPs exchanged glances that conveyed disbelief and frustration. The symbolic weight of that silence was a powerful indictment. It signalled the collapse of the political immunity that had once shielded the Prime Minister. Letters flooding the 1922 committee calling for a leadership challenge underscored the scale of discontent. For the first time in recent memory, the question of a Prime Minister's ability to govern effectively under public judicial condemnation was not theoretical, it was urgent and immediate. As political allies withdrew support, Starmer's defiant posture deepened the crisis. In fiery speeches and public statements, he doubled down on accusations that the judiciary was interfering in politics. Constitutional scholars and democratic watchdogs expressed alarm. Cambridge law professor Mark Elliott described Starmer's rhetoric as dangerous, warning it flirted with authoritarianism by undermining respect for judicial independence. Even newspapers historically sympathetic to Labour, such as The Guardian, published blistering editorials declaring Starmer had lost the moral authority to govern. Behind the scenes, party donors pulled back funding, citing concerns over the leadership's stability and ethical standing. Internal Treasury memos leaked to the press describe paralysis within the civil service, highlighting fears that governance was nearing a standstill. The broader implications of the scandal have unsettled not just British politics, but the entire constitutional framework. The Supreme Court's public rebuke of a sitting Prime Minister is unprecedented in modern history, raising critical questions about the balance of powers and the role of judicial oversight in a democratic society. The ruling set a stark precedent that no leader, no matter how powerful, is above the law or ethical standards. But with Starmer's outright rejection of the court's authority, the nation faces a dangerous impasse. If political leaders openly defy judicial rulings, the separation of powers risks collapse, threatening democracy itself. Moreover, the scandal has exposed fault lines within the Labour Party that may take years to heal. The bitter internal divisions, loss of public trust, and the looming leadership battle have fractured a party already struggling with its identity and direction. Starmer's failure to address the allegations transparently and promptly has intensified calls for renewal and reform. The shadow of this crisis will hang over Labour's electoral prospects and its ability to present a united front to the country. In the coming weeks and months, the nation will watch closely as the political drama unfolds. Will Starmer fight to cling to power, or will he finally step aside in recognition of the mounting evidence and overwhelming pressure? How will the judiciary respond if the Prime Minister continues to challenge its legitimacy? And what will this crisis mean for the future of British democracy, governance, and the rule of law? The answers remain uncertain, but one thing is clear. The scandal surrounding Keir Starmer is reshaping the political landscape in profound and lasting ways. This moment in UK history is a turning point, an inflection where the integrity of leadership, the authority of the judiciary, and the trust of the public collide in a high-stakes battle. As the dust settles, the country faces a critical choice between upholding democratic principles or allowing political power to override accountability. The saga of Keir Starmer's financial scandal is far from over. It has only just begun, and its consequences will ripple through British politics for years to come. The political earthquake, triggered by the Supreme Court's damning verdict on Keir Starmer, continues to shake the foundations of the United Kingdom as the nation faces a crisis of legitimacy, trust, and governance. This final section delves into the most recent and dramatic fallout, examining the collapse of Starmer's support base, the intensifying calls for his resignation, and the deep constitutional questions now confronting the country. With every passing day, the stakes grow higher, and the future of British politics hangs precariously in the balance. Following the court's ruling, the initial tremors of dissent rapidly escalated into a full-blown rebellion within the Labour Party. Senior MPs, once silent or cautiously supportive, began openly questioning Starmer's leadership. Anonymous insiders revealed a complete breakdown of confidence among key party figures, with many preparing contingency plans for an immediate leadership challenge. The atmosphere was thick with tension, trust had been broken, alliances shattered, and the idea of a smooth transition seemed impossible. The once formidable Labour machinery showed signs of paralysis, crippled by the scandal and the uncertainty surrounding its leader's fate. The growing clamour for a vote of no confidence echoed through Westminster, signalling that Starmer's hold on power was slipping fast. Starmer's refusal to step down only deepened the crisis. His defiant press conference, where he dismissed the Supreme Court's ruling as political theatre and accused the judiciary of bias, shocked even his staunchest supporters. The Prime Minister's open challenge to the independence of the judiciary alarmed constitutional scholars, legal experts, and political commentators alike. Former Supreme Court Justice Lord Neuberger described Starmer's remarks as reckless and dangerous, warning that such rhetoric threatens to unravel the delicate balance of democratic governance. The Law Society and numerous legal bodies publicly condemned the Prime Minister's attacks, reinforcing the seriousness of the situation. Starmer's stance polarized public opinion further and widened the divide between him and the institutions meant to safeguard the nation's rule of law. The consequences extended far beyond political infighting. Government aides, senior advisors, and civil servants began resigning in significant numbers, unwilling to be part of a government engulfed in scandal and losing its moral authority. Downing Street insiders described a state of chaos, with fractured communication, stalled policy initiatives, and the leadership team struggling to maintain cohesion. Public confidence plummeted as media outlets relentlessly covered the unfolding drama, analysing every leaked document, every resignation, and every public statement. The image of Starmer as a reformer committed to transparency was irrevocably tarnished, replaced by a portrait of a leader clinging desperately to power amidst mounting evidence of wrongdoing. Outside the halls of power, the public response was visceral and unrelenting. Mass protests erupted nationwide, with citizens demanding accountability and calling for Starmer's resignation. Slogans like 300,000 reasons to resign and we deserve better became rallying cries for a populace disillusioned by what they saw as a betrayal of trust. Economic hardships, social anxieties, and political fatigue compounded the anger, turning the scandal into a symbol of systemic failure. The legitimacy of government was called into question, and the question on everyone's mind was no longer if Starmer would resign, but when and how. The crisis also posed profound constitutional challenges. The Supreme Court's decision to publicly censure a sitting Prime Minister was without precedent, challenging long-standing conventions of judicial neutrality and political separation. Now, with Starmer's explicit rejection of the court's authority, the very principle of checks and balances that sustains British democracy was under threat. If political leaders can openly defy judicial rulings, the system risks spiraling into chaos and authoritarianism. The nation faced a crossroads: uphold the rule of law and democratic principles, or allow political power to override accountability. Parliament became the stage for this constitutional drama. As pressure mounted, the 1922 committee received a flood of letters calling for a leadership contest, the first step toward potentially ousting Starmer. MPs debated furiously over the legitimacy of continuing under a prime minister publicly condemned by the judiciary. Opposition parties seized the moment to demand immediate action, while some Labour MPs wrestled with their conscience and political futures. The possibility of a snap election loomed, threatening to plunge the country into further uncertainty at a critical moment. Behind closed doors, political strategists and legal advisors scrambled to anticipate the next moves. Discussions of potential criminal prosecution gained traction among legal circles, adding another layer of complexity and urgency. The intersection of law and politics had never been so stark, and the consequences for Starmer and the country were immense. The scandal, once a distant rumour, had exploded into a full-scale constitutional crisis with no easy resolution. As the nation holds its breath, the fate of Keir Starmer, and indeed the future of British democracy, remains uncertain. Will the Prime Minister finally concede to the mounting pressure and resign, allowing the party and government to begin healing? Or will he fight to the bitter end, risking deeper divisions and institutional damage? The coming days and weeks will test the resilience of British democratic institutions and the very principles they uphold. What is undeniable is that this scandal has forever changed the political landscape. The once unassailable image of Starmer as a principled leader is shattered, replaced by a narrative of secrecy, scandal, and defiance. The Labour Party faces an existential reckoning, and the entire country is forced to confront hard questions about power, accountability, and justice. The Supreme Court's intervention, while controversial, has illuminated flaws and fractures long hidden beneath the surface of British politics. In this moment of crisis, the eyes of the world are on the United Kingdom. The outcome will not only shape the next chapter of British governance, but will send a powerful message about the limits of power and the strength of democratic institutions. The saga of Keir Starmer's financial scandal and its aftermath is far from over. But one thing is certain: the country is witnessing a historic test of leadership, law, and democracy that will define an era.